By the time the Arab invasion of Egypt, which was the breadbasket of the Byzantine Empire, began, he was ill-prepared for defense. The fact is that the troops present in Egypt were not an army, but more like a military police, since their main task was to collect taxes from the local population, and not protect territories from invasion. The situation was aggravated by the fact that the Byzantine army in Egypt, numbering 23,000 soldiers, did not have a centralized command. Byzantine detachments were scattered across 9 provinces of Egypt and obeyed local rulers. As for the local population of the Copts, Monophysitism was widespread among them, which was considered heresy by the official Byzantine Church. To solve this problem, the Alexandrian Patriarch Cyrus, who was appointed by the emperor as the ruler of Egypt, tried to spread monothelitism, designed to reconcile the followers of Monophysitism with the official Byzantine Church. The actions of Cyrus caused the opposite result, since both followers of Monophysitism and adherents of the official Byzantine Church are negatively attributed to monothelitism. About the disagreements between the Byzantine authorities and the local Egyptian population, as well as the fact that the Byzantine army in Egypt was not ready for defense, one of the leaders of the troops of the Arab Caliphate, Amr ibn al-As, learned. The fact is that Amr was counting on the position of Emir of Palestine, but after he learned that Muawiyah ibn Abu Sufyan had been appointed to this position, he decided to act. At this time, a plague broke out in Palestine, which significantly weakened the Arab army. But Amr's ambition compelled him to act immediately. In December 639, at the head of a small army of 4,000, he secretly advanced towards Egypt. Caliph Umar, having received news of Amr's campaign, doubted that he would be successful and sent a letter with an order to return back, provided that the Arab army had not yet reached Egypt. Amr received the letter while near the border of Egypt. Knowing what kind of order is contained in the letter, he waited for the moment when his army was on the territory of Egypt, and only after that he read the letter. Thanks to this trick, Amr had the opportunity to continue the campaign without violating the will of the caliph. Oddly enough, Amr's cunning did not displease the caliph. Moreover, he began to gather new forces in Medina, in order to send them as reinforcements to Egypt if necessary. The command of the Byzantine army in Egypt showed simply incredible carelessness. Despite the fact that at that moment the Arab conquest of Syria and Palestine was being completed, the Byzantines did not even prepare the garrisons of their fortresses in Egypt for defense. It was thanks to the carelessness of the Egyptian command that the Arab army, having reached the first fortified Egyptian city of Rhino-Karura, managed to occupy it without a fight on December 12, 639. The beginning of the invasion was as successful as possible, and continuing the campaign, the Arab army reached the vicinity of the Pelusium fortress, which was located on the seashore and could receive food and reinforcements. Amr's army did not possess siege equipment and therefore had to besiege Pelusium for 2 months. During this time, the defenders of the fortress did not receive reinforcements and were forced to capitulate. Since Amr simply did not have the strength to leave the garrison in Pelusium, he ordered the destruction of all the fortifications of the city and continued to move deep into Egypt. Amr's successful actions attracted the attention of the Bedouins from the desert, who gladly joined his army. The offensive of the Arab army continued, and very soon it reached the city of Bilbais and began its siege. At night, the garrison of Bilbais attacked the Arab army besieging the city. The attack was unsuccessful. The Byzantines were defeated and the siege continued. After a month of siege in early March 640, Bilbais fell into the hands of the Arab Caliphate as a result of the assault. A new obstacle in the path of the Arab army was the fortress of Babylon, which defended the Nile Delta. Near the fortress there was a small harbor, which provided communication for ships in the Nile Delta. Realizing the importance of this fortress, the Byzantine command gathered an impressive force to protect it, led by the commander Theodore. The Arab army under the command of Amr reached the environs of Babylon in the summer of 640 and encamped opposite the city. Only part of the Byzantine garrison was in the city. The bulk of the Byzantine detachments were located in the camp next to the northern wall of Babylon, protected by a moat and rampart. Since earlier Byzantine garrisons did not offer serious resistance to the Arabs, Amr almost immediately attacked the Byzantine camp in front of the city. The Arabs furiously attacked the positions of the Byzantine infantry, but having fallen under the fire of the Byzantine archers, having failed to overcome the rampart, they were forced to retreat to their camp. Amr realized that the available forces were clearly not enough to storm Babylon, so he requested reinforcements from the caliph. While waiting for reinforcements, Amr was afraid of an attack by the numerically superior forces of the Byzantines, so he ordered to disperse his troops over a large territory, so that the Byzantines seemed to be besieged by a huge army. The Byzantines could not figure out Amr's cunning and did not attempt to attack the enemy, thinking that they were opposed by a large army. Some time later, the caliph sent Amr reinforcements in the form of 4,000 soldiers. Having received fresh forces, the Arab army again made an attempt to attack the Byzantine camp. The attack of the Arab army was swift. The sky turned black from arrows fired from both sides. A bloody battle ensued, but the Arabs did not manage to overcome the fortifications of the Byzantine camp, because of which they were forced to return to their original positions again. Amr again asked for reinforcements from the caliph and waited for their arrival. After some time, the Arab army received reinforcements in the form of 4,000 soldiers, so that under the command of Amr there were about 12,000 soldiers. Preparations began for a new assault on Babylon. At the same time, Amr feared that in the event of a full-scale assault on the defenders of Babylon, the garrison of Heliopolis could come to the rescue and strike at the rear of his army. To solve this problem, Amr decided before storming Babylon to send most of his army to storm Heliopolis. When the Arab army was approaching the city, the defenders of Heliopolis made a daring sortie. The Byzantine cavalry attacked the advanced units of the Arabs and managed to defeat them before the main forces approached, after which they returned under the protection of the city walls. The Arab army found itself in a rather unpleasant situation, since now it had to besiege two cities at once, but luck smiled on Amr. The garrison of Heliopolis was rather small and could not control the entire city wall. The Arabs managed to find an unprotected section of the city wall, and at night a detachment of Arabs was able to occupy part of the fortress wall. The commander of the garrison feared that the entire Arab army would soon penetrate the city, so he agreed to capitulate in exchange for the opportunity to leave Heliopolis. After the occupation of Heliopolis, the entire Arab army again concentrated in the vicinity of Babylon. In turn, Theodore realized that the Arabs would not simply lift the siege of the city, and therefore he decided to act. Theodore decided to use the traditional Arab tactic, which consisted of a swift attack followed by a quick retreat. Early in the morning, Byzantine detachments marched towards the Arab camp and fired at it with bows. A hail of Byzantine arrows inflicted serious losses on the Arabs, after which the Byzantine detachments hastily returned to the fortified camp. Since the Byzantine attack was quite successful, Amr was well aware that they would definitely repeat it. Therefore, under cover of night, he ordered several detachments of cavalry to hide east of the city. Everything happened as Amr expected. In the morning, the Byzantine army left the fortified camp and attacked the positions of the Arab troops. After a short shelling, the Byzantine army began to move towards their camp, and Amr's troops began to pursue her. At the same time, detachments of Arabs, who were hiding east of the city, blocked the way to the camp for the Byzantines. Thus, the Byzantine army was surrounded. A bloody battle began, as a result of which all Byzantine troops were destroyed. Thus, only a small garrison of Babylon remained at the disposal of Theodore. When the locals learned about the defeat of the Byzantine army, they, fearing for their lives, began to try to hide in Alexandria. Having learned about the defeat of most of the Byzantine army, Patriarch Cyrus personally arrived in Babylon to negotiate peace. Realizing that power was on his side, Amr offered the Patriarch to convert to Islam or pay a large tribute in exchange for making peace. Cyrus promised to pay tribute and return to Alexandria, while Amr continued the siege in anticipation of the promised money. When the emperor found out about the conditions under which Patriarch Cyrus tried to make peace, he summoned him to Constantinople and put him on trial. Amr, in turn, did not stop the siege of Babylon, waiting for the promised tribute. Despite the fact that the Arab army had a numerical superiority, the Arabs were in no hurry to launch an assault for fear of too many losses. After some time, the Arabs noticed that the western gates of the city, located next to the river, were poorly protected. Taking advantage of this information, at night Amr transferred most of his army to the western gates of the city in order to prepare for the assault. The maneuvers of the Arab army went unnoticed by the Byzantines, most of whose detachments were concentrated near the northern gates of the city. Under cover of night, a detachment of Amr's best warriors crossed the unguarded part of the wall and, having killed a few guards of the western gate, let the Arab army into the city. When battles began inside the city walls, Theodore realized that he could not repulse the attack of a numerically superior enemy. Therefore, he ordered one of his detachments to hold back the enemy, and he himself, with the remaining forces, boarded ships that were stationed in the Nile Delta and headed for Alexandria. As for the detachment that remained in the city to contain the Arabs, it fought heroically, but was completely destroyed. After the occupation of Babylon, the Arab army advanced towards the city of Nicaeus. Upon learning of the approach of the Arab army, the commander, together with the garrison, fled to Alexandria, thanks to which, on May 13, 641, Amr's troops occupied the city without a fight, after which they began to occupy the surrounding settlements. The local population of the Copts began to go over to the side of the Arabs, due to which the military power of Amr began to grow. At this time, the Byzantine commander Theodore, who managed to gather additional forces, advanced from Alexandria to meet the Arab army. After some time, Theodore reached the outskirts of the city of Sebennyt, wanting to replenish the ranks of his army, but the local garrison refused to join him. Very soon Theodore faced the Arab army. In the ensuing battle, luck was on the side of the Byzantines. The Arab army was defeated and Amr was forced to return to the vicinity of Babylon. In turn, Theodore, instead of continuing the offensive and trying to oust the Arabs from Egypt, returned to Alexandria. This was taken advantage of by Amr, who decided to expand the territory under his control and advanced towards the city of Antinopolis. The population of the city began to prepare for defense, but the ruler of the region of Upper Egypt, John, who was in the city, decided not to resist, but instead left the city along with the garrison and the treasury. On May 24, 641, the Byzantine Emperor Constantine dies and his brother Heraclius II becomes the new ruler. Since Heraclius II was a minor, power is in the hands of his mother Martina. Martina returns Patriarch Cyrus from exile and orders him to go to Egypt to conclude a truce with the Arabs. In September 641, a coup took place in Constantinople, as a result of which the son of the previously deceased Emperor Constantine, Constans II, became the new emperor. While the question of the transfer of power was being decided in Constantinople, Patriarch Cyrus began negotiations with the Arabs. On November 8, 641, peace was concluded on the following terms. The Patriarch undertook to pay tribute to the Arabs. A truce was also concluded until the end of September 642. During the truce, all hostilities ceased, and the parties remained at their current positions. Byzantium also pledged not to send new armies to Egypt. In addition, the Byzantine troops had to leave Alexandria within 11 months, along with their property and treasures. After the signing of this treaty, all of Egypt, with the exception of Alexandria, fell into the hands of the Arab Caliphate. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe to my channel.